Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is...
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fine, I think so. Okay. I have a thing here for us, Daniel, about doctors. You know, I talked about AAPS a whole lot. And this is another group, and it's called Americans Frontiers Doctors.
Frontline Doctors, yeah.
And they had a little conference up in Washington. They got a lot of attention, and they did a video of it. And guess what? They're on our side of this issue, and they were condemning, the lockdown and how this was handled. And the video went wild.
Yeah.
And that was really bad news for the enemies of liberty, because all of a sudden it gets taken down. Twitter went after them, and they really came down hard on them. But they wanted to talk about chloroquine from a medical viewpoint. They're reputable scientists, and they took a different position of the official position of, the Faucis of the world. And so this meant trouble. And it didn't last long. So Twitter, and that's your old friend, people at Twitter, they went and took them down. But I keep thinking, actually the numbers didn't go down because people had captured so much of this. And when they did this, more and more people got to watch it, and I'm sure they're still watching it. So I keep hoping that this kind of stuff backfires. It backfires on them, that when they start cutting things down and closing it down, that more and more people will watch it. And that's sort of what's happening here. But they were very, very good on the treatment, and they and thinking lockdown wasn't good and masks weren't good, and they really have a very good. And it wasn't like it was just a flippant political decision. Mm-hmm. They backed it up with their scientific beliefs, and the people listening to them evidently were very, very impressed. So I just wished more people would get to see them. I imagine there's going to be something on the internet. You might have to search more, but it's Americans Frontline Doctors. Yeah. American doctors who got together, and I guess they met on the Supreme Court steps, and had this sort of like a press conference. And I think it's sensational, because I know there's a group of doctors out there, but they need, and we all need this, because it's not like just the politician doing it because they're picking on Trump. Yeah. But they're doing this for scientific reasons, and it got attention. And I think the evidence is showing that more and more people are coming our way. Once they hear the truth of things, they can be converted. So to me, this was a good news story, even though the bad guys came and temporarily closed them down and got more attention for them than ever. I hadn't heard of the group. Now I know all about the group, and that's great.
And that would have been the case with millions of people. Yeah. But I think what is most fascinating about it is the reaction to it, is the coordinated attempt by all social media companies, even the company that hosts their website. This is a business transaction. Here you're hosting our website. They canceled the contract and took down their site, try to disappear them down the memory hole. So the reaction to this press conference, how many press conferences do they have in Washington a year? Thousands and thousands. The reaction to this one press conference was so unbelievable and so seemingly coordinated. It speaks volumes about the attempt to stranglehold information in the U.S. And if I followed it in the mainstream media, the reactions to this press conference, and the only thing that you'll read about these doctors, the social media has censored this video because of COVID-19 disinformation. At least one of the doctors is, oh my gosh, politically conservative. And the other one, at least one of the doctors, has religious views that we might not all endorse. Okay, I thought this was a free country. It doesn't affect her practice as a medicine, nor her reflection on her personal experiences treating patients with a certain drug that the mainstream may not like. But that's all you'll hear about it. They won't talk about the content of it. And so you'd say, well, these guys, maybe they all went to med school on the back of a matchbook. Maybe that's what it is. No. In fact, here's just a couple of them. Dr. Simone Gold, we saw her up there. Emergency medicine specialist, 31 years experience, graduated from Rosalind Franklin University, Chicago Medical School. Bob Hamilton, pediatrician, Santa Monica, California, UCLA, Geffen School of Medicine residency, UCLA. Going down the list, Dr. Stella Emanuel, who trained in Nigeria, where they do have some problems with tropical medicine that they need to deal with. Over and over, you're seeing people that have gone to Columbia University Medical School. So you would think with that kind of experience and those kinds of credentials, we should at least be able to listen to what they have to say. They say, follow the science. Well, these are scientists by definition, so why can't they even be heard? They can be discounted. I don't like what that doctor said. That didn't make sense to me. But why the effort to just disappear them?
See, they believe in this slogan, science has settled it, but it's their science that settled it. They don't even want a discussion. And a group like this just wants a discussion out there to present it to the people. But they did talk a lot about the hydroxychloroquine, and they've had success with it. They've had experience with it, and it's been very beneficial. But they also, in their overall treatment, they mentioned zinc, which Dr. Sardi has mentioned it, and also zithromycin they used, and also the vitamin D. You know, and it's, of course, we've mentioned it many times. It doesn't cost a lot, and they want you to buy the expensive drugs that have been totally unproven. You talk about science.
Yeah.
I mean, they want to go from maybe partial scientists, but they want to condemn somebody else instead of saying, well, why don't we discuss it? This is what happens. Organized medicine has made a lot of mistakes over the years. You know, and even in my lifetime, I've seen us doing things when I was in medical school that were just really ridiculous. But it changed because essentially, science never totally settles anything.
Yeah.
It usually raises more questions and more discussion. Because here you might say, here's a drug that's used for it's used for TB. But maybe science is limited, and then somebody started using it, for other things. And one with the viruses, they found out that it was working. So science is something; it should be done. They should be held to the same rigid rules of using double-blind studies and whatnot. Now, what about we talk about the vaccine that's coming, and they're so rigid. I say, well. Give them $100 million because it's 60% effective, And the real problem comes when the politicians get involved, and the money's involved and that sort of thing. So this to me was very good. I hope they get a lot more coverage. I doubt if you'll see them on national TV interviews. Maybe we can talk them into coming on our program.
I think Laura Ingraham had one of them on her show. She's done very well on this whole topic. She's been very brave. But I'm just looking at Business Insider, and there are thousands of other ones you could look at. But they have big, bold subheadlines that are supposed to terrify you and really convince you that these people are whacked out. And listen to them. The group, America's Frontline Doctors, has called for the lifting of lockdown restrictions and criticized measures to slow the spread of the disease. Well, that is a legitimate scientific perspective, that the idea of herd immunity, which is not something that comes out of left field. In fact, it's a history of humans. The founders, Dr. Simone Gold, told the AP in May that there was, quote, no scientific basis that the average American should be concerned about COVID-19. Well, average American, if that's the people in the age group that have 0.0000% chance of dying from it, that's probably true. And it's certainly not controversial. And here's the worst. The group is backed by the Tea Party Patriots, a conservative group that has supported protests against lockdowns. So when you read this, you're supposed to say, okay, discount them. I don't even want to hear what they have to say. They're a bunch of kooks. It's just amazing how politicized. And I wanted to mention one thing when you talked about the science being settled. I lived for a long time in Hungary, and Dr. Semmelweis, Ignaz Semmelweis was there, and he used a scientific method to discover that it's probably a good idea to wash your hands before surgery, and now that's common practice. But at the time, he was so ridiculed that he literally died in a mental institution because his colleagues hounded him and destroyed his personality and his psychology. So, this is what happens, but guess what? He was right.
Yeah, that's right. And there's other things in medicine that have done that. I do want to move on to something related to, of course, the lockdowns and things. But this headline is CDC director says there are more suicides and overdoses than COVID deaths. Do you believe that? I do. Nobody else wants to believe it. But this is, the thing that's wild is the CDC director said it.
Yeah.
And I had to double check this, and this is actually his quote. It says, the lockdown and lack of public schooling constituted a disproportionately negative impact on young people and mental health. So it's a very, very serious thing. So it's not only medical mix up. It's the social things too. In medicine, as I understand it, you can't separate the two. We're not just a scientific machine. There's the person, the emotions, the psychology is all mixed in there, and then the interference. And this is interference, but I don't know whether we can get too excited about this. But this has to be half good at least that he's saying this. I don't know. I guess being all over the place doesn't bother them, but if they're coming our way, I think that's a good sign. So maybe he would watch that press conference the other day.
And this is Robert Redfield. He's the director of the CDC. So he's supposed to be the authority. He's the science. And he was testifying at a Buck Institute webinar. This piece came across our desk yesterday, saying that suicides and drug overdoses have surpassed the death rate for COVID-19. And you read one good quote, but he said, "We're seeing, sadly, far greater suicides now than we are deaths from COVID. We're seeing far greater deaths from drug overdoses that are above excess that we've had as background than we are seeing deaths from COVID," he said. So he's recognizing, despite what the mainstream media is saying about these other doctors who are also recognizing the same thing, he's recognizing that there is a cost associated with shutting down the entire economy, with quarantining healthy people for the first time in history to prevent the spread of a disease that, guess what, we're finding out is going to spread anyway.
The dominant theme for them is politics, and they're not scientists. And that's why we don't want the government running scientific things like medicine. They should be out of the business of medicine. But there's another one that's interesting about what's going on with the health matters with COVID. And this is coming from the CDC. It's also talking about an article that says, this I had to double check. It says, "Panic for nothing," from the CDC. In the headline, Bob Wenzel had this up a few weeks ago. And we might have mentioned it, but we didn't talk much about it. But it says, now even the CDC admits COVID-19 is not a major threat. And yet, look at what they do. And it goes through and explains it and pointed out that, that there would be soon 1.7 million deaths in the United States, from this. I don't think it's quite that high.
No, it's not.
So this is something that people should be cautious when they look at that. Even CDC, they're not always right or always wrong. Occasionally they say something right. And of course, what we try to do is sort the two issues out if they're accidentally saying something right. But their credibility, where do they get their credibility? Where are they coming from? And that's the reason a more libertarian approach and a less political approach is to put it out there and let people sort it out, but rather than saying the bureaucrats, the politicians, the military-industrial complex, and they make their statements, and they're supposed to be making, speaking gospel, and that doesn't work, and the people have to be very cautious of what they hear. But I think this is good, and this was back in May, but they don't say it. We haven't heard her say that much lately about that.
What's interesting about that is basically they're saying what the Frontline doctors said. So maybe the Facebook and they should take down the CDC off of their site. Basically, they're saying the same thing. But the craziest thing, we put up the other day. We put up the tweet from Thomas Massey that was retweeted by Senator Paul about Kentucky going like this and down to 0 on deaths. And now the governor wants to do a lockdown now that they're down to 0. So even though it really isn't a major concern at this point, with some obvious exceptions for the majority of the population, particularly that under 60, it's not a major threat. They want to actually increase the lockdowns. And that's the craziest part. But what I've been looking at, Dr. Paul, and I think is really fascinating, is this whole idea that the entire response has been completely not only counterproductive, but absolutely deadly. And the response, particularly in Asia, has been shut everything down completely. Everyone has to stay in their homes, and this is going to go away, as if hiding from the boogeyman. Well, it's turning out that that's not the case. And if you read places like Zero Hedge and others, you'll see big outbreak in Asia. But I'm going to go through just 3 slides that I think describe what it is, and then we'll see what you think about it. Here's the first one. This is from May of 2020. This is the BBC putting up something from May of 2020, if we can get that, this is on Vietnam, if we can get that next clip up there. May 15th, 2020, coronavirus, how overreaction made Vietnam a virus success. And they're pointing to the fact that, you can see the woman in a face mask, they locked down the population. And the BBC, of course, backing the mainstream view that you have to lock down and quarantine, declared this a wonderful success. Well, here's the BBC today. The next clip. Coronavirus. Vietnam warns of outbreak risk across the whole country. So the locking down didn't work because it just came back. And that's what happened elsewhere, with the exception of places like New York, because the theory is that the virus had already spread enough at that point that it couldn't be contained. But so it looks like Vietnam and China and the other countries that locked things down totally, it was not successful. It comes back anyway. So where does that leave us? If their whole theory of fighting this was wrong, let's look at the next slide and see what you think, Dr. Paul. This came out yesterday, and we talked about it yesterday. Sweden unveils promising COVID-19 data as new cases plunge. And this just came out after our show, so we didn't have it on our show, but the new cases are plunging even further there because they allowed the virus to move through society, at least from what it looks like when you look objectively at the lockdowners versus the non-lockdowners. It seems like their whole theory and thesis was tragically, catastrophically wrong.
Now, we would have predicted, that there'd be a benefit by not joining in this lockdown business, but here's another headline very close to what you were saying. Sweden defeated the coronavirus without a lockdown. Now its companies are reaping the benefit.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they had their problems. There was a significant blip in deaths there early on, but then somebody looked at it and it was a consequence, which was sort of like in New York, a consequence of not handling the patients in the nursing homes very well. But the companies are now doing very well. They've recovered. Where are our companies?
Yeah, where are they?
We are the champions of the free enterprise system, which is a farce too, because what we do is if the world, some of these countries, if they don't do it, we tell them, the CDC or the IMF and other international companies, organizations will come in and say, unless you do what we tell you about the coronavirus, you don't get your foreign aid. And they sort of bribe these people. And people, the ones who just go along alone have done well. And I think that Vietnam is an issue, and Sweden. If we look back now, and when people will look at this more objectively, hopefully right away, or 6 months or a year, and look at it, because we may still be in a major, major problem, in 6 months or a year. Oh, well, we had a secondary episode of it,
Yeah.
But right now, we already see the evidence that it was better not to get hysterical about it. And there's a lot of hysteria intertwined with a lot of special interests demanding that they get involved. And we still haven't heard the last, and we've talked about this a lot already, about this vaccine. The more I look at that, that poses a great threat. But I saw some figures that show that Bill Gates is not the most popular guy in the country. Have you seen some of these things where his numbers aren't good?
Yeah.
That's good news.
Yeah, that great scientist, Bill Gates. But the other thing we wanted to mention, though, and this is our segment called Senate Comes to the Rescue, right? And this is, okay, we need more stimulus, we need more money. And of course, the Republicans are resisting every chance to spend money, right? And they don't want to spend any money. But you've been looking into the bill that the Republicans are coughing up, and it doesn't look like they're that awfully concerned with the virus. They're looking for another problem.
It's just another opportunity. They needed more money, but the Republican position was always, we'll settle for $1 trillion, as if this is a real compromise. And the Democrats, they start with $3 trillion. And they throw those numbers around like it absolutely means
Chump
nothing.
change.
As long as the stock market's going up, the money is going into the stock market. It makes a lot of people happy that happen to be in the top 10% of stock ownership, this sort of thing. But the $1 trillion, and it shouldn't surprise us, I know it didn't surprise you, is that they had the military-industrial complex had an influence in this bill.
No.
Well, why? Why would they have such influence? Well, it's just pork barrel. Anything going through this, tag along. And they said there would just be some military spending in there that we needed to get in because who knows when we're going to be invaded by China. And they had to, get ready for this. And I'm using that term loosely, but that's the whole argument. We always have to be on the defense. But I thought it might be, a couple $1 million, couple $1 billion. It is $50 billion into this. It's going to building more helicopters and jet fighters and all these things, as if we need more weaponry. I mean, we need more sense. Yeah. I wish we could mimic a little bit of common sense. Is what we really need.
And this just shows how the parties are so identical in so many ways, because this is it's called the HEALS Act. We're going to heal America with this act. It's how they always do this ridiculous. But you look in the HEALS Act, how are you going to heal the country when you're building a bunch of bombs and fighters and tanks? Certainly not going to heal the people where you drop the bombs on. But this is, it's interesting also when you juxtapose this sneaking all this money into buying from the war machine with the headline we saw, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow, but a really encouraging headline we saw on Zero Hedge this morning that looks like there's some real movement on Trump's intention to take not just 10,000, but now it's 12,000 troops from Germany. And it's not time to pop the champagne for a number of reasons. A, because some of those, I think about half of them are going to be dispersed elsewhere in Europe, but half of them are going to come home. And so that is a good sense. So we're actually, as Trump said, well, again, another reason not to pop the champagne is we'll believe it when we actually see it, because not only does he not always fall through with what he says, but he's got both parties in Congress against him on this. But nevertheless, it's a good move. So we're pulling back from stupid wars, useless conflicts, as Trump says. Why do we need to build even more bombs, more fighters, more jets?
This whole thing about him wanting to cut or change the foreign policy a little bit, but the Democrats, at one time that would be their policy, but because it's a chance to increase the amount of hate they can cast toward Trump, then they have to oppose it. Well, when the dust settles, the $1 trillion versus the $3 trillion versus military spending and all. It's, my cynical prediction is that they'll probably settle for $2 trillion, $2 trillion, 0.5. The military is going to get their money, and there'll be a permanent welfare state. But the one thing they do not have control of, the one thing that will restrain them is trying in the midst of all this nonsense to protect the purchasing power of the dollar. And right now, it's going down. I've talked to people. I like to talk to people who are contractors, everything. Prices are going up.
Yeah.
Talk to people who might even go to the grocery store. Prices are going up. But it's nothing like what's going to happen. And there was an article today that showed that China's using secretly, quietly, they're using more exchanges on international markets with another currency, probably their own, and not the dollar. So that is the only thing that is holding it together, is the fact that there is still some purchasing power left to the dollar and compared to others. But even in spite of that, it's gone down against these other currencies. And because I think we're much bolder in predicting these expenditures and making mistakes like on coronavirus. I mean, per individual, the Swedish individual is going to be wealthier than the American individual. Those socialists, what we need is more socialism. And here they're challenging, the status quo. And also, I think that a lot of people don't realize the connection of spending. Democrats, Republicans, deficits, printing money has something to do with the standard of living, and it has to do with the purchasing power of the dollar. And the irony of all this that I've noticed over the years is whether they think they're going to have deflation or inflation, they always say, we don't have enough money. And that's the reason. We've had the bust come from the Federal Reserve bubble, and now we have the coronavirus and all this money that we're spending. And guess what? there's not enough money. And they're arguing now, how long can we pass out $600 a week, unemployment benefit? And they play on sympathy. Well, these people are out of work and they can't even pay their rent and they can't do this. They create all these problems. Then they use it as an excuse to continue these problems. But the thing that will finally wake them up is a severe loss of the purchasing power of the dollar, and it's going to affect everybody.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. Well, I'm going to close out a little bit. I want to just do a little thing on Houston because I keep following that because I think it's important. It's a good indicator. And then I'll close out with a good news story. So that'll bring us up. But let's go to this next clip. This came from via Drudge, the top of Drudge, which I find to be one of the most hysterical websites on earth. And I've followed it since he started in '98. And I always found it helpful, even if I didn't always agree. But somehow he's gone off the rails. I don't know what's happened. That's a topic for another discussion. But on the top of his report for today, he had this quote, "I cannot save everybody. Houston doctor fights newest COVID-19 surge." Wow. Dated 29 July by Reuters. Wow, this sounds terrible. Let's look to the next clip. And here's a quote or two from him. "While in earlier pandemic hotspots like New York, the medical emergency has subsided, Texas is among the many U.S. states battling a resurgence of the virus that is straining their healthcare systems." And here's the doctor. Here's what he said. "I'm afraid that at some point in time, I'm going to have to make some very serious decisions. I'm starting to get the idea that I cannot save everybody." Well, that's kind of true with all doctors, to be honest. But when I looked at this, I thought, oh my gosh, something really big has happened. So I went over to the Texas Medical Center website to find out what's going on with the hospitals in Houston. There must be an unbelievable spike since yesterday when we were sitting at this table. So let's look at the trends from the Houston. So how on earth? This is the ICU and medical surgery hospitalizations. It peaked back in early to mid-June, and it's gone basically off a cliff. Let's look at the next one. Actually, this is the same one. Okay, but anyway, no, go back, please. But so you look. So all of a sudden, when you're getting to this point where you're literally falling off a cliff with hospitalizations, Reuters writes a report saying, "Oh my gosh, the sky's falling. It's all over." It's just incredible, the propaganda. And the last one is the good news story. And let's look at that last clip. White House is recommending that Tennessee close all bars. Governor Bill Lee says nope. And here's the little bit from the story. Dr. Deborah Birx, remember her with the big, whatever she's wearing, White House advisor among the top coronavirus officials in the nation, said Monday Tennessee should close their bars and limit indoor restaurant dining to prevent a looming escalation of the coronavirus outbreak. Moments later, Governor Bill Lee said he had no plans to follow this recommendation. So good, Governor Lee. You're the good guy of the day.
There you go. Wonderful. Well, we need more good guys, and we look for them. We try to stimulate people to become a good guy. And I think we are making slow but steady progress because I think truth wins out in the end, but it takes a while. So although we're concerned, I'm concerned for the cause of liberty, not for the coronavirus killing a lot of people. I mean, that's just not it. It's just being used. And I'm concerned about the gullibility of people. But that's tradition. That's been that way throughout history because most people just do go along with what they hear and what the general attitude is. And that's why you get communism and fascism and welfarism, all this, because the general consensus is spouted out and the people go along with it, which means that the thought leaders, the people who teach economics and the people who write history and try to present the truth are very, very important because they establish these beliefs. And I see progress there. There's a lot of private sources. The internet provides it, and I frequently cite Lou Rockwell and others who have done this, and they've changed the attitude of a lot of people. So every once in a while, I'll come across somebody, and they'll be doing great work, and I've never heard of. And I said, "Where'd this come from?" And they said, "Oh, well, I was a supporter for you in your campaign." I go, "Holy man, there's a lot of activity going on out there, imperfectly, but it's out there, and it's so much better than listening to the demagogues and the so-called theoreticians that are in our universities now." I think that's been the greatest threat to us. I think that's why we are where we are, because how many university professors, how many universities, there were a few, how many of them taught for the last 2 or 3 decades, spending might be necessary time, but watch out. It can become a habit. You can become addicted to it, and it'll get out of control. And they say, well, yeah, maybe, but we're not like Zimbabwe and we're not like Venezuela. Let's hope not. But the temptation to spend money when it's not backed by anything is overwhelmingly great. It's been tested hundreds of times throughout history, and the temptation is always too great for those people who grab political power and economic influence to use that to promote and buy influence. And that's what they're doing now, Democrats and Republicans. Desperately. We have to spend a lot of money before November and offer more and more stuff and build up our special interest. And that's the contest going on, and that has to change. And when the total collapse down and the dollar doesn't function, we will be faced with a real decision to make. We as a nation and the people who are trying to lead the thinking and the philosophy of the country have to decide what is the responsibility, what is the role of a government if you want to live in a free society? What is the role of a government if you want to bend over and become dependent on authoritarian government? That's really are the offers. Right now, we are moving rapidly toward more authoritarianism, but that provides an opportunity because this is going to fail, and the people will have it on their plate, and they'll have to say, I think we can take care of ourselves better than the government. The government has not done a good job in managing, the quarantines and the management of disease. Like if you don't do it, you have killed people. This nonsense. So no, I think the contest and the ideological setting here now is a healthy argument. It has to come because nobody argued with what they were doing. I thought we would see an advancement after 89, 90 with the collapse of communism. People were saying, well, let's do something, let's at least talk to the communists and all that. But I've always been feared that the answer would be that they would accept the type of interventionism, inflationism, and deficit financing that we have in this country, and things would eventually end up the way it was in the Soviet communist system. And we are moving in that direction, but we don't have to. All we have to do is wake up a few more people. So I want to thank all of you, our viewers, who are in the business of waking up people, because that is what counts. And I'm very appreciative of it, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.